those who don't know Commvault, we are and have been a backup and recovery company for a long, long time. We do a lot more than backup and recovery, though. It's fair to say that we have a platform that enables you to do a lot of things with data, including mapping and those sorts of things. But the focus today really is around this notion of backup and recovery in the cloud. Now, if you went to any events last year, you probably heard that next year was going to be the year of the cloud. And I think since then, it's been reviewed to be this is kind of the decade of the cloud. More and more organizations are dipping their toe in the water or going wholesale with cloud-first programs or becoming cloud native. So there's a lot of things going on. And when I sat down to put this together, I thought the first thing to do would be to address one of the first questions we asked. Why do you need to back up and recover if you're using the cloud? So it seems to be something that's a little bit forgotten. I'll give you some great examples. Helped no end by Google's outage yesterday, actually, which I thought was quite timely, coming to talk about backup and recovery in the cloud today. Then there's actually been a shift. Some of the things that we do with backup and recovery, the way we're able to collect data, index it, move it around really efficiently, actually changes maybe your perception of backup to be something that's a lot more powerful than the name suggests. You know, if you think about backup and recovery, it's taking a copy and then putting that copy back somewhere else. If only it were that simple. It really isn't. And then really, the last kind of thing is just looking at the complexities of cloud and some of the things that you might need to think about from a mapping your data perspective. Now, I know a lot of people around these parts are going to talk about similar sorts of things, but this is something that can be really helpful, and we do it in a very automated way. The first thing, however, is I want to point out about the importance of data. Now, I'm sure you all realise if you don't have your data, whatever your organisation does, it's probably going to stop doing it. But data actually pushes you into a few different areas. Data is the root of innovation these days, being able to use data in new and different ways. Collecting it, of course, in line with your privacy policy is really important. But also data can be a big anchor to agility. So it can help you be agile if you can use the data, but it can also stop you using the data down the line. Everything around data has a cost too. So if you're using a cloud service, you've probably gone down the subscription route. And if you think about things like service continuity, you know, if you'll remember 10 years ago, something big used to happen just before Christmas. You tried to go online and buy something, and that website would crash. Those things don't kind of happen anymore because organizations have moved to the cloud. So the cloud has a big impact there too. And of course, there is more and more governance applications that run from the cloud as well. Now, when you start to think about data, actually a good proportion of it now actually lives in the cloud. You think about, I'm sure a lot of you have gone down the Office 365 route, or maybe have some, you know, AWS, Google Cloud, a bunch of other things. But then you start to think about all the other areas, and all of these, pretty much except cost control, have a big data footprint. Now, the reason I've not put cost control in there is I think a lot of experts now agree that moving to the cloud to control costs is not the right reason. There's been a lot of organizations repatriating systems because the cloud just worked out too expensive. So you have to think about the cloud as more of an enabler more than a cost control tool on its own. Now, before we kind of dip into the backup and recovery side of things, I thought it was worth actually examining how many clouds you all use. Can anybody, hand on heart, say exactly the amount of cloud technologies you use in your organization? One brave person over there. So we're now into the world of what's often referred to as multi-cloud. And surprisingly, you know, big organizations will find that one cloud doesn't give them everything that they need, or that their services are more efficient if they use more than one. Now, smaller organizations, maybe putting all your stuff in one place is going to be more helpful. The next thing really is software as a service. So again, out on the floor there, you'll see a number of organizations offering those types of things. And what we typically see, I mean, my own marketing department at Commvault probably uses about 5 or 6 different SaaS applications. But when you start to broaden it across the environment, actually, you start to look at a lot more than that. And SaaS has become, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you use things like Salesforce.com, and other technologies like that. You might even have your backup and recovery or disaster recovery outsourced. All of those things count as SaaS. And then the last one, really, over on the left side, is about more along the lines of this kind of personal use. Now, you can lump Office 365 in there, so even though your organization might go down the Office 365 route, the individuals, they're going to use a lot of other different services. And this is where it really gets scary. So literally a few weeks ago, I was at a GDPR kind of dinner, data protection event, and one of the individuals there looked at the amount, they've been looking at the IP network, and they found something like 70 different personal cloud services like Dropbox and those kind of things that are being used, kind of not just the sanctioned stuff, but in addition to that. And that's actually where it gets kind of iffy, because if your staff are using those kind of services, then actually they're the product, and that makes your business the product of what they're doing, because they're not paying for it, so that data's being monetized, you can guarantee that. So you're much better off keeping them in places where you can obviously keep control of them. That comes down most of the time to education. And really what I wanted to point out is whenever you use one of these cloud services, you will find these T's and C's. It will say it's your data and your responsibility. So even as big as AWS is, as Google is, and Microsoft, if they had a serious outage that resulted in you losing data, you know, it could be you're into pharmaceuticals or something, you've got DNA profiles that are a matter of life and death, or, you know, it could turn out to make a lot of people ill, kill somebody. Even Microsoft, AWS, Google, those sizes of companies can't afford to underwrite that, and that's why you have these terms in there. Now, so that's one thing, just bear that in mind for a moment. The second thing to think about is that outage that I mentioned yesterday. People think about the cloud as always being there, as being super reliable. But you don't have to Google verify. Literally, I sat down, I just went cloud outage. I found these 3 articles really quickly. And these are different things. So one's about Office 365 being down. If that's down, it's going to hurt a large number of individuals if you use that. The Guardian article is about Google being taken out a few weeks ago. It happened again, literally this weekend. And then you've got the piece on Salesforce from the Register. So those that don't know, the Register's a rather tongue-in-cheek IT media outlet. And what's really scary is a lot of organizations don't really understand the ramifications of losing data in the cloud. Does anybody use Salesforce.com? Okay, a few hands. Does anybody know what the cost of recovery is at Salesforce and the SLA, the service level agreement that they provide? Okay, so the service level agreement is more than 1 week, it's 10 days, and they will charge you $10,000 to recover your database in the SFDC cloud. So that's a SaaS application where it's all under their control, but they still want to charge you for that service, right? And this is kind of where you start to dip. Not only is it about availability, it's about also this notion of losing data. And really, this is why I wanted to focus on this piece about, you know, getting backup in the cloud done properly. So the first thing is there's a huge difference between availability and backup. Availability just means that if part of the system falls over, there's something else to pick that up. If you have a data deletion or something else, then getting that data back is a completely separate process. So if anybody uses Google Docs, for example, once you delete something from Google Docs, after 7 days, it is completely gone. Google cannot recover that for you, right? Same sort of thing applies to Office 365 and other things like that. Most of the big cloud providers, the infrastructure as a service like Azure, AWS, they will give you some best efforts, but unless you see somewhere on your contract that you're paying for backup, you're not getting a backup. The second thing really is this notion of downtime. Data is more and more critical to our businesses. If you lose access to the data, your business will go offline. And the average, if you're an enterprise, the average amount is 350,000, about £300,000 per hour of downtime. So there's some really big numbers involved if you lose access to data. And as I pointed out, these clouds aren't absolutely infallible. The other thing that's kind of a bit of a challenge too is there's a lot of people my age, the storage architects of the world, that work in IT, and they're leaving their business and going to open coffee shops instead because they've kind of had enough. So there's a big skill shortage. And actually, that's at a time when IT is getting more complicated than it ever has. And the other thing to think about backup is also a point in time for your regulatory proof. So if somebody does ask to be forgotten and you delete their data, and then at some point down the line, it turns out to be some kind of criminal information that's involved in that, and you deleted that, actually a backup can protect you from those sort of things too. Now, you're not obliged to have that, but it can certainly help down the line. And what I said before about backup being really useful at collecting data and moving it around actually gives you a lot of potential to turn it from just regular backup and recovery into something more powerful, and that's data management for whatever you do in the cloud. So this is an example of the kind of things that we do. So first of all, I mean, this is just the cloud side that you see over on the right there. And it's got the big clouds at the top, but we actually support Alibaba, Oracle Cloud, IBM Cloud, and so on. But we can pick up systems that you have on premises and move them efficiently into the cloud. That same process can be used for dev test. And I'm sure you've all seen reports in the news where somebody's put a database in an unprotected cloud bucket, and then some hacker, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but there's actually a search engine that you can use called Shodan, and it'll find open cloud buckets so people can actively look for this sort of data. So having all of that in a nice encapsulated, access-controlled process is really good. Things like disaster recovery as well, not only inside the cloud, but between clouds. Moving data between different tiers of storage inside the cloud can also dramatically reduce costs. And ultimately, if you can pick up your virtual servers and move them around the cloud and the data that goes with them back to on-premises, you actually get a lot of benefit from that. And of course, all of this stuff is actually indexed, so it helps you to start to find your data and make use of it. Now, I'm running a little bit low on time, but this is one example of a customer of ours, and they actually used the Commvault backup and recovery technology to migrate into Office 365. Now, it's a security agency, so I'm not allowed to name them, and they had a private bit of Office 365 running for them. But they estimated they had so much data it was going to take 18 months to migrate from on-premises, email, and file servers and those kind of things to put stuff into the cloud. And they were able to do it in just 18 months. And part of this, and this is really where I was going with the mapping piece that I mentioned before, actually, one of the big challenges around cloud, and you saw the multi-cloud stuff that I was talking about right at the beginning, is that we don't always know where our data is. And if you don't know where your data is, you can't manage it from a data protection sense, and you can't manage the security. And a lot of this stuff you really need to think about automating. So I realise this might be a bit of an eye chart, but if you can map your data from the outset, you can understand where to put it, whether to dispose of any of it. You can, and by the way, you have to do this for the cloud providers that you use, as well as for things like laptops, anywhere that personal data can reside. And just because you have a policy, it doesn't mean to say that people aren't doing that. So you have to do this kind of mapping, whether you like it or not in most cases. But once you've done this kind of indexing, if it just tells you to change processes or alter the way that you do things, educate better, that's one answer. But until you start to actually look inside the content, particularly of unstructured data, and manage its life cycle by its content in an automated way, something that's not manual, then you're really going to struggle to ever get a handle on these processes. Actually, the one other point I should make, I was just on a panel, and it's really this DR and cloud efficiency thing at the bottom. I was just on a panel next door, and one of the questions was, how can you prove back to the business that your efforts to be compliant, are having some impact on the actual business itself? Well, if you've got less data, so if you collect less data, if you understand what you've got, if you expire it sooner, if you put it on lower costs of storage, and I realise a lot of that is dipping into IT processes and not just the kind of data protection processes that you're thinking of, then there's a cost implication to that. If you have twice as much data as you need and all of your systems fail, it's going to take you twice as long to get all of that data back. So this notion of data minimization, actually actively managing its life cycle and putting it into the right place from a security perspective, all of that is really, really important. So really, I mean, like I said, it was a very short session. We've only got 20 minutes to discuss this. And actually, we've got a stand over in the corner, so come and see us. We've got some nice shopping bags and books and pens and the usual kind of fare. But really, you know, the important thing to understand is, as I said right from the outset, unless you're having backup and recovery paid for in the cloud, you have to assume that it's not happening. You know, Office 365 doesn't have any native protection built in, nor does Azure, nor does Google, nor does AWS. And when you start to use their systems internally in the cloud, they can be really expensive because they'll consume the same storage for backup as they do for the thing that you're actually running. So by having the ability to protect those things in the cloud and move it onto lower cost storage, not only are you protecting the business from this notion of it's your data and your responsibility, you're also able to cut costs and show back to the organization that you're making a difference. The other big thing that I often have discussions about is just because you put something in the cloud, it does not absolve you of your data protection responsibilities. Right? So you have to understand what they are. So when you're going through the T's and C's, working out whether they're a co-processor, you know, or whatever, then you need to also understand what's happening on the backup and recovery side of things too. It's all in those contracts, right? Exactly what you can expect is there. And finally, I'll make this the last point. We have a technology stack that's a broad platform. So you can do pretty much anything with your data from a move, protect, understand, automate perspective with our platform. And it works across every cloud and on premises and pretty much with any kind of system you've got internally. And right now, many of your organizations will probably have between 5, 15, or even 20 different backup and recovery products. And for you then to start unpicking that and actually finding some value from it that's going to help with your GDPR or data protection processes, it's going to be really hard to do. So what I would say is if you found any of that interesting, like I say, come and see us. We're over in the far corner over there. I'm a regular blogger. You can find us on obviously on Facebook. I'm tweeting all the time. So if you have any interest there, I'm at Nigel Tozer. With that, I'll take any questions.
You said something that was potentially contradictory about deleting data on request and then having a backup and being able to reproduce it. I guess that's allowed, but
Yeah. So
caveats do you have to put in to allow a backup?
Are you still holding data if it's in a backup? And the answer to that is the guidance from the ICO is no, because ordinarily it's not being processed. So you don't have to, it would be unrealistic for you to have to go back into backups and delete data. Needless to say, most backup systems don't allow you to do that anyway. That's why that data would still reside in a backup. The interesting thing is if you do a recovery of that data, and you've already forgotten somebody, you have to have a process in place to re-forget them at the point of recovery, which deals with the particular oxymoron I think you were getting at.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. That was wonderful. Thank you.